People to download Unity and learn C#. Like, don't use visual scripting, how like networking works and how HTTP requests work and post and get, right?
Hello everyone, good evening. That's a picture of me before the coronavirus. Oh, I think I can control with my phone.
Yeah.
It's working. Cool. Okay, so tonight's topic is disrupting Japan's gaming market. Specifically, we want to talk about what opportunities exist in a very disruptive, highly competitive, and lucrative gaming market that was the genesis for games around the world. So just kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. I'll do a quick introduction of my company called Shinka Labs. I'll talk a little bit about how I got into the game industry. Then we're going to look at the game market in Japan, so some data and some numbers to help tell the story of what's going on. Talk about disruptors, disruptive forces in the market here in Japan. The opportunity, which, you know, the kind of, I guess, big sale of this presentation is that there is huge opportunity here in Japan for anyone from any background that wants to get in the game market right now, no matter what background you come from or career you come from. And then I have some other tools and resources on how to get there. Cool, so my company is called Shinka Labs. Our mission is to be a leading IT market entry consulting company in Japan, while also developing cutting-edge video games and applications that leverage AI technology to push the boundaries of what's possible in the digital world. So we started about, I think, 3.5 years ago, and I think I'll go more into... Yeah, so what do we do? Our main gig right now is market entry consulting for video games. So our biggest client right now is from Sweden, and they have a lot of game products here in Japan. So that's kind of our main thing that we do. And then we also, you know, after working for this client for quite a while, we realized that games are extremely lucrative and we should make games ourselves. But not only that, games are also awesome to make. I love making games. So we do that as well. And as everyone knows, the whole developer community was shocked last year with OpenAI's API, and then later on with ChatGPT coming out to everyone in November, December. So we kind of did a bit of a pivot, and we're working on a couple AI applications right now as well. So how did I get into the game industry? I mainly come from a digital marketing background, not gaming or anything. So, you know, as many of you probably, you know, pivot along your careers, I made the decision as I was working for lots of different Japanese companies to try to get more and more into a technical role. So this went from anywhere from being just kind of asking and, you know, just by out of necessity having to learn things like data science, learn things like, you know, JavaScript and like how to actually make applications. And then eventually we got the call from a Swedish company that needed like a local CEO basically for their operations. So that's kind of what started everything with the game consulting business. Game consulting and game development are very different, but game consulting is kind of our core thing. And then I've been doing music and sound effects actually for video games for like 10 or 15 years, I don't even remember. I actually knew a lot of developers from the school I went to back in Florida. I'm originally from the US, I grew up in Orlando, Florida. So yeah, I think some of these games aren't even like on the store anymore because it was like 15 years ago. But that kind of helps me get used to what it's like to be on a developer team, and especially someone not from a technical background, because back then I had no idea what anything was. I didn't know how to code or anything, but I could like make music and sound effects. So it helped me get in and kind of figure out like what other people are doing and what's available inside of game studios for people with like non-technical backgrounds like myself. And then really this started a couple years ago, getting started as a game developer. I had some friends, one was ex-Nintendo, and another one is just really good developer I'm in on Discord. But I actually paid them to teach me how to code in C# and how to develop games for Unity. So that's really helped, and we have our first game hopefully going to be debuted this July at Bit Summit in Kyoto. So looking forward to that. These are just some projects I'm working on right now. So Throwback Highlight Heroes, is it's a game called Highlight that like no one's heard about. It's really popular in South Florida. This is going to be released in about 200 barcades in the US. So yeah, I'm doing all the music and sound effects for that. Also, finally working a little bit on Unity on that project too, for like sound design and whatnot. Another big one is the Mahjong project that we have here in Japan, which I do mainly consulting for their local operations and marketing and everything. And then, as I said, we're developing our first 2D space platformer, which at the time of making this, I thought that Summit was in August, but they changed to July. But yeah, so that's what's going on right now. Or how I kind of got into the game industry. So let's look at the mobile game market. This is an interesting quote I found. So there are only two industries that refer to their customers as users: illegal drugs and software. So whenever I do consulting for clients, a big question that they have is, you know, what is the total accessible market, right? Whenever I was working for like pharma companies or other Japanese companies that were local operations but were owned by foreign entities, they always wanted to know this kind of data. And actually, a lot of people don't know this, even though you can just Google it, and it's like the first thing that comes up. Like putting this into a slide deck, I found like really helps me out in my career. So this is kind of the way I like deal with a lot of clients and like kind of show them, oh, this is how big the market is actually. So right now, you know, the total addressable global mobile gaming market is about 92 billion, and then 51 billion on console. So there's quite a gap there, and you know, it's best to look at how fast things are growing. So really, mobile is the leader here. CAGR, the compound annual growth rate. Mobile leads at 27%, and then PC and console, you know, about 2.3%. So really, one of the reasons I'm showing you guys this data too is if you're interested in getting into the game industry here in Japan, you really need to be mobile focused. Even if you're working on a product that's for PC or your target build is maybe Android or something, yeah, or just some other, you know, target build. It's always good to have a mobile build in mind and ready to go, just because here it's very important. So the Japanese mobile gaming market, let's go into that. So in the span of a decade, mobile gaming will have grown from a small segment in 2012 to a $100 billion industry in 2021. This is quite significant, and like I just mentioned, you know, if you're developing an app or a game for, you know, Apple CarPlay or something, it's still really good to just keep mobile in mind. And so let's look at Japan specifically. So what's the total accessible mobile gaming market in Japan? So we said about 92 billion, you know, plus or minus a few billion for total global, and then Japan is 22 billion. That's a really, really nice size market. And then Japanese players usually spend about 1.5 times higher than in North America and other markets. So it's really, really good. It's very lucrative. And we use ARPU. It's the average revenue per user as like a metric to figure out, you know, if we make this game, like how much could we potentially make and do projections. So Japan's mobile game segment is projected to be at about $418, which is awesome compared to the worldwide ARPU, which is just $64. So yeah, making games in Japan can be very, very lucrative. And the device breakdown, this is probably no surprise to a lot of you. iOS has a very high user rate here in Japan. The penetration rate by iOS has been incredible, especially over the past 10 years. This says 65%. I've seen other, you know, data sources say around 80% or so. But it's just good to keep this in mind. So if you do have a game or something you're building, make sure you have a mobile build and make sure it runs on iOS. Is just a kind of a takeaway from this. And this is also worth mentioning as well. You know, when I first visited Japan in 2009, a bunch of Japanese high schoolers were making fun of me because I had an iPhone. And my friend that spoke Japanese, he's like, you know, they're all saying like this American came all the way to Japan just to look at his iPhone. And then I came back to Japan in 2012 and everybody had an iPhone. So this stuff can change really quick, right? And there's a lot of interesting platforms or build targets that we can build games for. Apple TV, who I see as being like, I don't know, like silent killer. If any of you guys have been in the Apple Store recently and looked at what games and stuff they have, and kind of the experience that you can get from just this really simple controller, I think that Apple is going to be a huge competitor coming up soon. Apple CarPlay obviously is really big in the US, not so much here in Japan, right? US is more of a car-based society. Tablet, Oculus VR XR, cloud gaming services, smartwatch, PDAs, Android devices. There's a lot of different Android devices. So it's good to keep this in mind, like really at any point, one of these could enter the Japan market and take up a lot of the share. So, as a developer or as an if you're aspiring to be in the game industry as a consultant or whatever capacity, it's good to know that these things exist and kind of, pay attention to what's happening there. Cool. Up next, game engines. So this is a big topic in the consulting business and the development business. Has anyone here tried a game engine before? Oh, cool. All right, awesome. All right. Yeah, so there's obviously a lot not listed up here. I listed the big two, and this is a very big debate on which one's the best and which one you should start using. My opinion, and when people ask me about what engine should I start using, I tell them don't think about that. Just start using an engine and just get 3 months or 6 months of experience into that. Even if it's Game Maker, that's not on here, Godot, that's not on here. Those are really good solutions as well. If you are kind of looking to start your own game studio, or you're looking to get into the industry, Unity and Unreal are probably the most used. And then also there's a lot of custom engines that studios use, so this is pretty big as well. But if you know how to use one of these, and you understand things like what is a game object, and then you learn object-oriented programming from Unity, for example, it could be a really easy transition into using some kind of custom software that's at the company. And then, you can ask yourself some questions like, are you an indie game dev? If so, I would recommend Unity or Godot. Is your game 2D? Use Unity. If you use Unreal, you're going to have a 1 gigabyte build that's going to be really hard to minimize and get onto an iPhone, for example. On the other side, if you're a 3D artist and you're working with a group of 3D artists and graphical performance is very important to the success of your game, then definitely Unreal. I usually tell people, this is what I did, and it really helps me kind of gain a lot of insight and just vision into how everything works. I tell people to download Unity and learn C#. Don't use visual scripting in the beginning. I know this is a very highly debatable topic, and we can talk about it in Q&A. But C# I think is a very, very clean language. And the really good thing about using C# with Unity is if you're developing an app, for an iPhone, and if it's networked, and say you're using JavaScript, you're going to be dealing with a lot of stuff that's not intuitive, and you don't really know how networking works and how HTTP requests work and post and get, right? But with video games, if anybody's played Mario, you kind of intuitively know how things should feel and how things should work. So I think there's a lot of merit to learning C# and learning object-oriented programming. I won't rant on that so much. We can talk about it later. But so disruptors. Okay, the topic of tonight. So this is from a Harvard Business School professor. Disruptive innovation transforms the market by substituting simplicity, convenience, accessibility, and affordability for complexity, inconvenience, inaccessibility, and high cost. So this is all under the hypothesis that Japan is breaking apart. So maybe you guys have heard some stuff about Square Enix recently. Square definitely, Square Enix, formerly Squaresoft, they were the ones who kind of brought Japanese gaming to the world stage, right? They've been making some really dodgy decisions recently, specifically in their management. Eidos Montreal, there were some issues there, so they basically sold off all the resources, the IP that was there for pennies on the dollar. At the same time, I don't know if it was Square Enix, someone was complaining recently that there's not enough gamers in Japan, and we need to go global. And it'd be funny if that was Square Enix, because they just got rid of a bunch of IP and stuff that they owned over in Montreal. And they're also making a big shift to blockchain gaming. Now, another company did this last year, and I think we all know how that turned out. Facebook. with the metaverse. And I'm not like against blockchain gaming or not. My argument is like I think we've already had blockchain and crypto-based gaming layers in games for about 20 years, since games like WoW and whatnot, and then like some of the online Final Fantasies had their own in-game economies that didn't require blockchain. So the big question I have is like, do gamers actually want blockchain games? So I don't know the answer to that. I think we'll find out over the next year, especially since Square Enix is going to pump a lot of money into that. But in any case, if you've got these major players that are, deciding, okay, we're just going to put all of our money into blockchain, get rid of all of our international IP, this is a disruptor in the fact that it does create interesting opportunities for indie game devs. Because if the market is all focused on this, you could make something that's completely contrarian to that, right, and be successful there. There's quite a lot of these. I'll try to go these a little bit faster. So rigid IP rights with Nintendo. So Nintendo really likes to sue and take down videos of like people remaking Mario 64 and whatnot in Unity or Unreal. I think this is a really bad practice personally, and so do a lot of my other developer friends. They don't really embrace their community at all. As a matter of fact, they punish their community. So I think this is a huge disruptor in the fact that it's just not good for their business in the long term. It's kind of like, imagine you have a guitar and you learn a song from your favorite guitarist and you post it to YouTube. Imagine getting sued by that guitarist. Like, how would your perception of that guitarist and their band and everyone else your age be? It would probably be quite negative. And Nintendo has kind of a bad reputation for this as well. Granted, this is their company like strategy or whatever, so let them do what they do. But it is a disruptor, I would say. And up next, something maybe a lot of us are quite familiar with: Japan Inc. squashing innovation. So there is an over-reliance on established franchises. Like, how long has Mario, Final Fantasy, and Pokemon been around for? Like, what, 95? I think Final Fantasy's been around since the late 80s, right? But they just keep pushing this, and there's not a lot of innovation, honestly. Resistance to change, resistance to cross-platform play, insularity and lack of diversity is a big one too here in Japan. If you have 10 guys that look like me making a game, I think the game's going to suck. I think you need a very diverse group of people working on a game together, because you're going to miss so many things. You need people from other countries as well, especially when you get to playtesting. You spend a year making something and think it's awesome, and then everyone playtests it and hates it. So, but this is the way in which Japan is proceeding to go, right? With this very insular and lack of diversity approach. But this is a disruptor, and also creates opportunity for those that do not approach game dev in that way. Here's another one, big for Japan: low IT literacy. So, as most of us probably know, like maybe a family that hasn't visited Japan, our friends back, in whatever country we come from, everyone thinks Japan is really high tech and stuff, right? But the IT literacy here is really, really bad. And this actually hurts the game industry in Japan, as far as I'd say like Japan Inc. level. Not so much maybe like an indie developer. But there's limited adoption of new technologies, limited online multiplayer, limited use of mobile devices, and difficulty in marketing. So these are just some of the other things that are going on here. I could probably talk about this for 20 minutes, so we can talk about that later. The indie game dev scene in Japan. So it's been historically small and underdeveloped compared to other regions, such as North America and Europe. There's a number of reasons for this. As we all know, a risk-averse culture, limited access to funding, limited support infrastructure, and as we said earlier, a focus on established IP. A lot of games, it's difficult for them to get funding here in Japan if it's a new and novel idea. And also, and some of you may have, other experience as well, but what I've seen and talking to people that are in the industry, in Japan, as far as like actual game programming, which I want to emphasize, game programming and game design is not 100% of game development. You've got artists, you've got musicians, you've got a lot of other backgrounds that are working on these games. But game programming specifically, for a lot of Japanese, they get hired by, Nintendo or whatever at age 22, and they'll spend 10 years training in-game programming, like either maybe Unreal, maybe it's a custom engine inside. So by the time they're really technically proficient at game programming, they're about 32. And by no means am I saying that's old or young or whatever, but if you compare that to the US and other markets, a lot of people are using YouTube to learn game dev. And 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds are releasing games in Europe and the US on Steam. So you've got this kind of huge difference in the approach to game development, just because of the scenes are different, and also lack of resources as well. Okay, this is a big one. Foreign actors entering the local market. I think this might be the biggest disruptor here in Japan, because Japan's in big trouble. If you guys have heard of a game called Genshin Impact, for those who aren't familiar, AAA game, it was very successful, and it used a lot of traditional Japanese-style design elements, and a lot of Japanese players were shocked to hear that this game was not made by a Japanese studio. It was made by a Chinese studio. And they did an amazing job of, taking stuff from, they took a lot of inspiration and a lot of tools that are available here domestically. For example, Breath of the Wild, the Zelda game, they used that as like a kind of their inspiration for how they're going to develop the game as being like a 3D action adventure game. And they used 3D models from a Japanese company called Vroid. So they used a lot of Japanese infrastructure to build out this game. And it was extremely successful, not just in China, but worldwide. So, yeah, this, in my mind, this is a huge disruptor in Japan, and the fact that, I think this is one of the biggest examples, it might be the biggest, of a AAA game being able to really kind of seem like it was made in Japan and have that kind of Japan branding, right? We see this too now. The guy who made Your Name, I forgot his name right now. It's a very famous anime director. I think at the Berlin Film Festival, he recently said that, 10 years ago in Japan, and this is an animation, like animators believed that everything that they were doing was very unique to Japan, and it was all Japan brand. But there was another Chinese animator as well that was nominated for the same award, and he was a big fan of her work. And he was saying, in 10 years, like anyone's going to be able to emulate this brand, right? And now we've got AI basically blowing everything up. So how quickly are we going to be able to emulate a lot of stuff that was traditionally, Japan and Japan branded technology and whatnot? So, okay, next disruptor, no localization, the blanket approach. I like using Google Maps because, so the blanket approach is basically, you take a blanket and you put it over an entire country, whatever. This is more of like a software thing. And then you expect users and you expect, over time, the application of the game will get better. So they expect, people to knit things and everything. I don't know if you guys remember, but Google Maps, for me, like it really sucked like 10 years ago, but it's slowly gotten better and better and more integrations and stuff. And a lot of that's user-based too, right? Like you can see live on the train, like, oh, this train is really busy. Oh, well, Google knows that because people are giving it information. This is really risky actually in Japan because customers have very high expectations when it comes to product quality and localization. When Google Maps was first launched in Japan, it was widely criticized for its lack of local features and inaccurate data. I remember being lost a lot using Google Maps. I think I opted for, the other Japanese apps. So, this also alienates the target audience and they lose market share to competitors. And we'll go back to the blanket approach in a second on the topic. So what is the opportunity with all of these kind of disruptive forces going on? This is from COO of Nintendo of America. This is the most exciting time to be in the games industry. We have a platform for any and every idea and the power to make it a reality, specifically the Unity. So the opportunity, there's ample room for innovation and experimentation. There's a low IT literacy, which means even an average tech literacy by foreign standards can make big moves in Japan. I believe this very strongly. I have friends and that are examples of this. The success of Genshin Impact, which we talked about earlier, which is using basically Japanese branding to be very successful. And it's not made here locally. And this is just an anecdote from my current consulting business, but so in our industry, the games that I do consulting for with the Swedish company, they have a number of games, but we're also, in this industry together with a bunch of other companies. 95% of games in this, I'd say like game industry that we're in are not localized for Japan. They don't have any localization for the Japanese market. They all take the blanket approach. They just throw a blanket on it. They expect things to improve over time. The 5% of games that actually localize, and we can talk about localization too in Q&A, like what that actually means. But the 5% of the games that actually localize are extremely financially successful here in Japan. So that's something too that you could focus on if you don't want to go the developer route and like coding and whatnot. Just being good at localizing products for Japan is very, very important. So how do we get there? Here's another quote from Steve Wozniak. You can't just ask customers what they want and then try to get it to them. By the time you get it built, they'll want something new. So constantly be playtesting, basically. These are just random list of tools. There's like probably thousands of tools, but there's some ones that I thought that were important. Learning how to make games and apps is really good boot camps here in Tokyo. YouTube is such an incredible resource, especially if you're doing C# or Unreal. Networking, so Clubhouse. I have Clubhouse up here. Some people are like, what the hell? Clubhouse, that was like 2 years ago. Nobody uses that anymore. There's a lot of really good developers on Clubhouse. And, oops, I got excited and pressed a button. There it is. There's a lot of really good, no, that's the wrong one. There we go. There's a lot of really good developers on Clubhouse. And from Clubhouse, like I've met really good developers, and then we became friends on Discord. And now some of them are working with me, and we're working on game products. The game that we're trying to get out this month to be accepted into Bit Summit in Kyoto, I met the guy on Clubhouse, and yeah, that's how that started. If you guys want more like detailed information in those groups, I can give it to you. There's meetups all over Japan and the world. You don't have to like, you can like go to meetups in Singapore. You can go to meetups in South Korea from Japan, and like kind of hack the meetup system just to like get all that information and knowledge. Because a lot of them are online or whatever. Getting to launch, if you actually have a game and you're developing it, Kickstarter is a really good platform that a lot of indie game dev studios and indie game developers use. Marketing, social media, and build in public. This is something that I preach, but I don't do. But it's very important to, while you're building, show off everything. And it's, a lot of people don't like to do this, including myself, because I think like, oh, this isn't, why would I want to show this off? It's not good enough, blah, blah, blah. But really, like starting a devlog, and just showing people what you're building, you'll be surprised. Even if you don't have a lot of followers, in my opinion, it's not about how many people are following you. It's more about who's following you. If you're taking the developer track and you want to learn game programming, somebody following you might be a very good 2D artist that you need for your game. So then you can add them to the team that way, or they might be a publisher. So yeah, those are some good tools. So how do we get there? Making a team. It's important to remember that this is a very multidisciplinary field. So, a game designer is very different from a game programmer. I've had a lot of conversations with clients about this because, they think all these things up here. Game designer, game programmer, UI, UX design, artist, music, marketing. You can do all that, right? It's kind of like their thing. But no. We need like a team for this. Some people do manage to do all of it themselves, but I wouldn't recommend that. It's not good for your mental health. Better to put together a team. And let's see, what's the next slide? And just a note on this, at the beginning of the presentation, you guys were talking about, I think you guys are starting a game dev event. So that would be a really good platform to kind of meet people from different backgrounds. Discord is also really good. Discord is tricky though. It's hard to find like the good channels to go on. But yeah, just like, I wanted to stress the point that this is very multidisciplinary. Even me, before I got into game design and game programming and now consulting, I was doing music for about like 10 years, and I did game marketing as well. So yeah, you need all these people on your team. This is just a random aside on like operations. So like the Mahjong project I'm working on right now, don't think that like, let's say you release a game and it doesn't have that, in your mind it might not have that many users. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of games, even with like 500 daily active users, yield incredible returns. And what's going to happen too, once you like build and release a game, all of a sudden it's like, great, you did it, you were successful, congratulations. Now you have to, update that game, and you need to play test it, and you basically need to be the COO, like an operations manager of the game, and you need to manage the dev team, the local operations team. Is it live in Japan? Well, you need a local Japanese operations team. Marketing, customer support, it all has to be in Japanese. Design, just something to keep in mind, It's I'd say the goal, what's it called? The goal post isn't like when you finish the game. It's really like after you finish, there's a lot. There's like this part. A lot of people actually step away when it gets to this part because like I did not sign up for this. This is too insane. I can't handle like the servers are going down every day and like customers are pissed off and I don't even know what's going on. It's very chaotic. So, but yeah, that's kind of on the operations side. That's actually what I'm dealing with right now, to be honest. But yeah, all that aside, the big thing I wanted to kind of sell and stress to everyone tonight is no matter what background you come from, if you're interested in gaming, there is something there for you, especially now, and especially in Japan. So get out there and start making stuff. That's it.
Oh, yeah.
Try and find that. Thank you. Hello, testing. Okay, cool. So that was fantastic. Thanks, Kelly. All right, so I'm sure you have a lot of questions. That was a deep dive, and honestly, my head's a little bit foggy. But I'm not in game design, so whoever is in game design or want to be, do you have any questions? Please raise your hand, and I will go right to you. Whoa, that was fast. All right, I'll go straight to you. And I will have this mic on my phone. Don't be scared. It's just recording your question.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going? Yeah. So I'm making a VR game right now.
Awesome.
And yeah, like a lot of things you said like resonate with me because like I actually used to work at Square Enix too, so I kind of know that whole kind of. Well, I can't comment, but anyway, I used to work at Square Enix, but now I'm making a VR game. And then the other thing that resonated with me was you're like, oh, after you make a game, then you have to do all this other stuff. You're like, oh, that's where everything begins. And you're like, oh, man. Yeah, that's kind of where I am right now. So if you were making a VR game, for example, right, like how would you go about getting people to play it? In other words, like how do you market the game? Like what would be like the first step? What kind of channel would you do? Etc.
That's an excellent question because it's very hard to get people to play test your game and playtest it in a way that is beneficial to you and for the development. I can't believe I'm going to throw this name out again. I actually found a lot of people that wanted to playtest my games on Clubhouse. So Clubhouse, Discord, and just start a mailing list. Just really kind of grassroots style. There's some big events too. Like if you can get your game out at Tokyo Game Show, if you can get it out at Bit Summit. Even if you can't get a booth there, just go there and network with other developers. The developers that I've met, all are extremely, they want to play other games. They're always searching for other games. And if you guys are both local here in Japan, what I've seen from the developers I've met, like that I met at Bit Summit last year, is they're really, really good like helpers. Like they're always like, one guy the other night, like let's jump on a Zoom call and I'll check out your build and then he gave me a bunch of advice for adding juice to the game, which I did in real time while I was talking to him. So yeah, it can be tough. You really have to kind of do grassroots and build up your own mailing list, and then pop into some Clubhouse chats and let people know.
Anyone who shares in Clubhouse?
I think I had like 7. So yeah. I was really about to. But it can be tough though. That's a really good question.
Thanks.
Thank you. You mentioned that you have a lot of links. Perhaps you can share that with me and then I'll share with them at the end.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes, let's do that.
Somebody else had a question here.
Hi, so I'm Joseph, I'm a UX designer. So you said you need a team to make a game, right? So I've seen there is game designer and UX designer, and when it comes to UX designer, it's kind of tricky because even if you work in a software, you have to explain to your client that UX is not only the visual part. So in a game, I would know what is the difference and how a game designer and how a UX designer works together.
It's a very good question. And I would say I struggle with the same thing with my clients as well. Like my clients don't even, my main client doesn't even know what UX is and doesn't really care, to be honest with you. So, even though it's so important, as we all know. I would say traditional game design is really, if you're not a programmer and you're just designing a game, it is pretty similar to like maybe working in Figma and creating screens. This is how I want the game to look. When this happens, kind of like if then, if then, if then. Really something that can be translated into game code, right? When you start looking at it from a UX perspective, especially modern UX perspective, with all of the new tools and UX is exploding right now in all industries, I would say that most games that are made do not have the infrastructure to support a lot of the new and advanced tools with UX and the new methodologies. I would say it's like the Wild West right now. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's very difficult. I mean, I think someone coming from a UX background that works on applications like for iPhone or whatever, they can offer so much to a game studio that both them and the game studio are unaware of. It's kind of like where digital marketing and data science were about, I think, 7 years ago. People didn't know, like, if we combine these two things, like it's going to explode and like we're going to make a lot of money. So I think, yeah, like the new UX practices mixed with older game design practices, which can go anywhere from like level design to building screens to building out the game, visually, so that a game programmer could come in. Combining those, I think, in the next 2 to 3 years is going to be really kind of a big boom actually in game design.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Another question?
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was just wondering, it talks about localization. This is actually like a two-part question, if you don't mind. So, how deep or how far would you consider localization? For example, Pixar, when they make movies localizing in Japan, they switch out broccolis with Brussels sprouts with broccolis. Or Chainsaw Man, for example, the anime. In China, they switch out the blood color to white, for example. So how far, when you're making a game, would you localize that for Japan?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's one part.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. And the second part is that worth it? Like, why is that still relevant though? The global, like the whole Japan brand. Wouldn't it be better to target globally instead, rather than having still sticking to Japan brand? Isn't that still a niche?
That is an excellent question as well. So first question is localization, how far? 2, is it worth it? Localization, how far? I was just having a conversation before this meetup about localization. I would say with localization, you want to, if you build a game and it has a core game loop, and we could do a whole talk on what a game loop is. It's like a whole other thing. Like, if it has a certain feel, right? Like, let's just, an example probably everyone knows, the original Mario, right? You have to move from the left side of the level to the right side of the level to win. If you fall, you die. If you hit like an enemy, you die. All that stuff are core game mechanics that should, in my opinion, should not be changed. So a lot of localization has to do with, that's a very simple example, right? That like, you can probably fit that example in any market, and not a whole lot of localization is required. But now you've got games that are visual novels that, are mostly text-based and whatnot. I would say you really, for Japan, like I was saying, Japanese customers really expect things to be ready for them to experience at a high level. Like I said, in the industry I'm working in, 95% of companies do not localize. They just throw it to Japan like, it should work, right? It's kind of their attitude. But what we find is that it doesn't work. You really have to get Japanese to playtest the game, figure out what's not good for the market. And a lot of times it is just visual stuff. right? It's just like, it could be color changes, it could be like simple design changes. I wouldn't recommend messing with the core game loop or the core game mechanics. Does that answer your first question, kind of?
Yeah.
And the second question is it worth it? Why can't we just make something that works for the whole world, right? That's a great question. I think I probably have two opinions on that. One would be, like, if it's you know, Tarantino used to talk about, like, you need to make a movie that can work in every country, right? Like Tarantino, the film director. I think that still doesn't work for games and software in Japan. I think things really need to be localized in Japan to be successful today. Maybe in the future, you know, maybe that will change. But right now, just because of all the particularities of Japan, and kind of like some of the disrupting factors we talked about, right? Like low IT literacy here locally. Not all Japanese, but it's just something that exists here. Taking into a lot of these disrupting factors into consideration, it is worth it. And we do see more financial success when companies take the time to just, even just translating into Japanese. You know, a lot of people just dump an English language product here and they'll expect it to work. You need to have good translation, I would say, at least, at a bare minimum. Yeah. We could do a whole talk on that. Localization.
We'll give it a few weeks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Another one? Oh, wow.
Hi. So I guess my question, kind of along the lines of the like localization where it's necessary. Like why is it that Japan is so picky about, or like kind of the word I can come up with is bratty, like needing things like ready-made perfectly for like the users. Why do you think that is?
So I think some of my designer colleagues here would probably be able to answer this question better than I can. But from my experience, Japanese users and gamers especially are used to a specific design pattern, right? They've experienced games in a certain way for 20, 30 years now. And when you diverge too much from that design pattern, and it's you're going to run into problems here. Users aren't going to know why things are located in certain areas. So there are very specific archetypes that exist in Japan. And I think it's really important to know those. Even if your product, you know, everywhere else in the world looks like X, in Japan we have to make it look like Y because these are the design patterns that they want to see here. So, did I answer your question?
Kind of.
Kind of, okay.
I guess, yeah, it's kind of maybe more going into like why is it that there are those archetypes, and why haven't, like, they're established, but what made them become established?
I think we can use the analogy to where, you know, fax is still really big here. You know, everyone still uses faxes, right? So these archetypes were established a long time ago. They've worked, and kind of, I forget which disruptor it was, probably like, you know, a lot of Japanese not willing to try out new stuff, like the low IT literacy amongst users, and then also, yeah, they're not trying to innovate so much, right? Just use the established patterns. I mean, I don't want to like say bad things about Nintendo all night, but really they've been rehashing the same game over and over again. Granted, I love all the Mario games, like they're amazing, like even the newer ones. They're really, really well made. But they all use, like, you know, ready established design patterns that people are like, as soon as they jump into the game, they're ready to go. I think games are a little bit more unforgiving than apps too. You lose gamers really quickly if it doesn't have those established design patterns. We do a lot of game testing for the Swedish company, and it's funny, they ask me this question like probably once a month, like, oh, why are they so picky? Like, you know, but it's just the way it is, and yeah. You know, I wonder if there's a book that has like a lot of these established design patterns in Japan. That would be cool. I don't know, maybe we could look that up sometime. But I think that's kind of the thing, where it's at.
Thank you.
Another question? Oh, sorry. I think we have time for one more after.
Alright, first of all, thank you for the talk. I do have a question about how would you get your games into the hand of Japanese players. For example, you said that localization's a big thing, but for an indie developers, right, they might not have the enough resource, and also like there are not a lot of streamers, Japanese streamers who play foreign indie games, and then Japanese people doesn't watch foreign streamers who play indie game as well. So, how would you suggest how an indie dev could get their games into the hands of Japanese players?
So that's a very good question and very good points too, right? Japan is very siloed, right? While the rest of the world is like blowing up on Twitch and everything. I would say earlier, I think I got a similar question. I think you really have to be grassroots about it. You know, when we went to Bit Summit, it was about half and half. Half Japanese developers, half foreign developers. I think you need to get their information, let them know you're working on a game as well. Would you be willing to try this out? And most of the time the answer is yes, especially if it's a developer. Getting regular users to do it can be expensive and very hard. So really, but I gotta say, like, even if it's not an experienced gamer, getting it in the hands of anyone that you know that's Japanese and seeing how they react to it. I've handed games to a Japanese friend, and they, you know, from the main screen, I had a terrible UI design. So I don't want to do this. I don't want to immediately, bam, I'm like, okay, there's a huge problem with the UI, right? Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't think we have right now, unless someone else knows about it, like a really great resource where we could just be like, hey, could you try out this game and test it? I think on, you know, Discord also is a little bit biased towards the foreign audience as well. There's not a lot of Japanese Discords. I even spoke to a Japanese developer, and he's got a YouTube channel, and he was pretty big for a while, and he did all of this stuff in English, but he's Japanese, and I was like, dude, like, why don't you do stuff in Japanese? Because no one's doing, he was doing like Unity VMware tutorials in English, and I'm like, you gotta do this in Japanese because no one's doing it. And he's like, no man, like, there's no audience for that. You know, I don't know if he was correct or incorrect because I've never tried it. But yeah, it is something that's difficult to find. You don't need that many Japanese playtesters though. You only need like one or two. So if you can find those one or two, you're golden. The current consulting game, we only have like 2 guys that test everything. So
Thank you very much.
yeah.